So you probably heard by now the shows at the Mirage on January 14th and 15th were canceled. Now everyone's blaming me. It was not my fault, and I'm here to give my side of the story. So I'm doing my normal Let's Make a Deal hosting Wednesday. I leave the studio, and one of the production assistants comes up to me and says, the bus leaves tomorrow night for Las Vegas. I'm like, why are we going to Las Vegas? And why are we taking a bus? She's like, well, you got some shows to do at the Mirage. I'm like, well, what shows do I have to do in the Mirage? She's like, well, you're Wayne Brady. I'm like, I'm not Wayne Brady. She's like, do we have to go through this again? DNA does not lie. Then I said, well, if I have to go, at least you could have got me a private jet. She's like, yeah, we could have, but we wanted to save some money, so the bus leaves tomorrow. So I go home that night, and I'm thinking about this. I'm like, you know what? DNA does not lie. But what about facial recognition? So I call up, and I say, I want a facial recognition expert there tomorrow to prove I'm not Wayne Brady, or else I'm not going to Vegas. So they're like, okay, we'll have someone here. So I get there in the morning, and this facial recognition guy walks in with his little laptop and his cameras. And he's setting up, and I'm like, well, who are you? He's like, I'm a facial recognition guy. I'm from the FBI. So I took my phone, and I kind of snapped a picture of him. Then I sent it to my people. And I said, is this guy with the FBI? And I looked at the face, and they're like, yeah, he is with the FBI. I'm like, interesting. So he sets up, and he's like, well, we're ready for you, Mr. Brady. And I gave him that dirty look, because he didn't well know I'm not Wayne Brady. I go, you know what? It's a little warm in here. I'm going to open a window. So I go to open the window, and I'm pushing on it like it's stuck. I can't get it open. And I notice in the reflection of the window, one of these big envelopes, the Let's Make a Deal people slide this big thick envelope, it's all bulky, over to the quote unquote facial recognition guy. And I'm like, oh, something's up. So I sit there, he puts the camera on me, takes my picture, runs it through the machine. And next thing you know, it's like, facial rec says you're Wayne Brady. Look, turns the computer around, and I'm like, let me see that. And before that, I go, pretend I'm going to sneeze. And with COVID, someone sneezes, everyone backs up. So they all backed up from the table because they thought I was going to sneeze. And it went, achoo. And I grabbed the envelope. And I looked in the envelope, and I see it's an envelope full of cash. So I go over to the window, and I'm like, what is this? That machine's a fraud. That guy's a fraud. They're like, no, he's from the FBI. Facial recognition guy from the FBI. And I'm like, yeah, FBI, the TV show. Not the FBI, the federal agency. You didn't think I had Paramount Plus? I wouldn't see him? So then they all started looking at each other. Everyone got quiet. I'm like, yeah, by your silence, your quietness, I'm right. So that test is a fraud. So I'm not going to Vegas. Get the real guy. If not, I'm dumping the whole $1 million. I just guessed on that. Outside this window, and what's going to happen. They're like, well, Mr. Brady. I'm like, don't call me that. They're like, okay, we're sorry. We just didn't have time to get a real facial recognition guy in less than 24 hours. So how's that my fault then? You told me less than 24 hours that I had to do the show. So they're like, you know what? Just calm down when you talk about this. I'm like, the time for talk is over. I'm not going. And so then the facial recognition guy ran out. Securities comes in. They got tasers and guns all cocked and ready to go. And I'm like, what are you going to do? Shoot me? They're like, Mr. Brady, we don't want to shoot you. I'm like, don't call me that. They're like, we don't want to shoot you. We don't want to tase you. But you need to put down the money and come away from the window. So I started looking out the window. They're like, don't jump, don't jump. I'm like, I'm going to do it. They're like, don't jump. And so I jump out the window, And of course, there was a truck down there with a bunch of mattresses because I had to set up because I knew something was wrong. And once I got the text about him being the FBI TV show, I called in for an escape plan, basically. So I hit the mattress, bounce out, bounce onto the street, perfect landing, open the passenger door. I'm like, go, 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 go. I look at the driver and it's Betty White. And she's like, what's wrong? I'm like, you're supposed to be dead. She's like, oh yeah, I'll explain that. I'm like, but we gotta go. So she's driving, swerving, people are lining up shots, but they would line up the shot and I'm like, Betty White. And by that time, the truck would be past, so they wouldn't be able to take the shot. So then we get to the security gate, and I'm supposed to have a remote, hitting the remote, gate won't open. She's like, what are we gonna do? I'm like, ram it. So she rammed the gate. Betty White rammed the gate. Oh, we knocked the gate open. We're outside. We turn around, later, suckers. Betty White flipped them off. I was surprised. So then we get to get around the block, maybe about a mile away, pull over, and I'm like, why you pull over? She's like, where are we supposed to go? I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. And I'm like, what is this about you, Betty White? I'll explain later. And she did that Mission Impossible thing and took the mask off, and it was LaToya Jackson. I was like, LaToya? Where'd you learn to drive like that? She's like, oh, I was a stunt driver for all the Fast and Furious movies, so I've been doing this for years. I was like, well, thank you. She's like, where are we going? I'm like, well, do you have a safe house? She's like, do I look like I have a safe house? Where about Michael? Michael Jackson have any safe houses? She's like, yeah, but we sold them. Why'd you sell them? I want the money. Okay. So I made a call, and so there's only one safe house for me, Area 51. So we had to do a road trip. So finally, LaToya dropped me off. And she's like, I'm like, how much? How much do you want? She was like, well, my fee's 10%. I'm like, well, there's $1 million envelopes. So I gave her $100,000 in cash. She took off. The aliens at Area 51 were all like, oh, we saw the escape on TV. It was on network? No, we have special TV. I was like, oh. Well, you guys gonna keep me safe? Like, yeah, we even have the party planned for you. Oh my God, you knew it was my birthday? Well, of course, we knew you were coming once you sent that text about the FBI guy. I was like, well, thank you. So actually, it was not my fault the shows were canceled. If Mr. Brady wants to do a show, he needs to do it himself instead of trying to get me to do it. Plus, for me, it was the best birthday ever because I had a party all weekend at Area 51 and I made $900,000.